You need to be able to trust people, my mother told me when I was still a teenager. And throughout my life, I tried to trust people until the very day came when I found out that my beloved wife was cheating on me. Be prepared. That was the Boy Scouts' motto. The Scout law, however, was a bit different. It said a Scout was trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Apparently, it also meant being naive, foolish, idiotic, gullible. They all fit. Nick was out of explanations after reading the email on his wife's iPhone. Normally, he wouldn't touch her phone, and she knew that well. That's why she didn't bother with extra security. After all, Nick was a former Boy Scout, trustworthy to the core, someone who respected privacy. But his wife was going on a trip soon, and Nick was trying to recall the name of the hotel she'd mentioned. She had told him before, but he hadn't really paid attention. Now he wanted to avoid the argument that would come if he asked again. Lately, those arguments had been happening more often. This trip was going to be the longest they'd been apart since getting married 5 years ago, and Nick had been thinking about doing something romantic, like sending her flowers. What better way to show his love than to send flowers to his wife while she was far away in Paris, the city of love? Except, it turned out, she wasn't going to be loving him in Paris. No, that role was for Dwayne, who would be joining her on the trip. After entering the passcode to his wife's phone, their wedding date, Nick found himself reading one of the explicit emails she and Dwayne had been exchanging over the past few weeks. They were planning a moonlit walk down the Champs-Élysées, followed by a boat ride on the Seine. What shocked Nick almost as much as the affair was the fact that his wife, Linda, and her lover, Dwayne, were using their work email accounts to correspond. They should have known better. Both were lawyers, and Dwayne was a paralegal at Linda's firm. All three of them had spent hours combing through emails during litigation, knowing full well how many secrets could be unearthed in document reviews. There were always stories about someone getting caught having an affair, and now Nick had his own real-life version of that tale. Nick hadn't been paying attention when Linda mentioned the trip and the hotel the team would be staying at, but for a good reason. Something felt off. At the time, Nick couldn't quite put his finger on it, but his instincts were alert. After 5 years as an attorney, trained to catch lies or omissions, his listening skills were sharp. Something about the way Linda told him about the trip didn't sit right. It was a dull arbitration case, she said, so busy they wouldn't even get to enjoy the city. But she hadn't looked at him when she said it, and it came off too casually. She knew Paris was one of Nick's favorite cities, a place they had always talked about visiting together, especially since Linda had never been there before. At the time, Nick thought her tone was strange, but he hadn't considered the worst-case scenario. Now, as he stared at the email thread, it felt like a knife to the heart. "Why don't you ditch the Boy Scouts so we can spend more time together without sneaking around?" Dwayne had written the night before. "He makes me feel safe," Linda responded. "So, why are you cheating with me behind his back every chance you get? You turn me on." She added a smiley face emoji. Nick had no idea what his next move would be except to print the email exchange using the Wi-Fi printer in the basement, just in case. His instincts as a seasoned litigator kicked in. First, preserve the evidence. After printing out the email and putting it in his computer bag, Nick thought about it. He had a clear idea of what he wanted to do. In his opinion, he had two options. And in these two versions, his wife will not be well in the truest sense of the word. Dwayne, on the other hand, faced even more brutality. But before he hurt anyone, he needed to think. It was his ability to think that made him a lawyer. He was paid to use his mind, not his strength. And he had to think fast because Linda had gone for a run and would be back soon. Before he could even start thinking, he had to complete the mission and locate the hotel. It wasn't for sending flowers, though. He wasn't sure yet what he needed the information for, but he knew it was important, maybe for a target. There it was. La Clève Tour Eiffel, near the Trocadero, just across the river from the Eiffel Tower. It was about a 5-minute walk from the International Chamber of Commerce, where Linda and Dwayne would be working on their arbitration case with the rest of the team, at least when the Sardo d'Otralfre were, and they weren't spending their free time between intimate moments. With the hotel found, he quickly needed to do some research on Virginia divorce laws. He recalled some details from the bar exam 5 years ago, but it was always wise to double-check. Adultery could be grounds for divorce and could impact issues like alimony and property division. But there were also defenses to claims of adultery, one of which was condonation. If a spouse discovered the infidelity, resumed intimacy relations, and continued living together, it could be used as a defense. He needed to leave the house immediately, and there would be no confrontation. Not yet. His plan was to catch her off guard, hitting her with a full force of surprise, without any unexpected factors complicating things. He intended to control the battleground of the end of their marriage. This meant he would have to lie. It wasn't in line with the Scout law, but this was war. As Churchill famously said, in wartime, truth is so valuable that it should always be protected by a bodyguard of lies. Nick's lies would serve a greater purpose now. After all, no one was under oath. He went upstairs to the master bedroom and started packing. He finished quickly and placed the bags by the front door. He was nearly done gathering the essential documents: bank and credit card statements, 401k and IRA details, car titles, pay slips, the mortgage, and Linda's latest student loan balance when she returned from her run. He heard her in the kitchen as he came up from his office in the basement. Deciding to appear stressed and irritated, he saw her sipping a Gatorade. Her brown, shoulder-length hair was pulled back into a ponytail. She looked good, though he found her repulsive. He realized then that the love between them was gone. "Guess what? I'm going to Paris," he said with a bitter smile. The color drained from Linda's face, her blue eyes growing pale. "What?" "Paris, Virginia." Her shocked expression quickly faded. "Sven just called," Nick continued. "We've got depositions to prepare for in my insurance case, and we need to get the witness ready. Apparently we lost a motion to compel. The judge is furious, and the whole discovery schedule is a mess. I'll be traveling for weeks, but I might stop by here and there to do some laundry." "Poor thing," Linda said with a concerned look. "Maybe your firm is hiring." "I'd much rather go to your Paris," Nick added, watching the concern creep back into her face. But then she smirked. "Send me your resume. Maybe you have the right qualifications for us to consider you." It was a jab. Linda's law school had a higher ranking than Nick's. Then, possibly feeling a bit guilty, she moved as if to hug him. But before she could close the distance, Nick turned and headed back down to his office. The urge to punch her in the face was coming back, and he wasn't sure he could keep it in check. When he came back up, Linda asked what he wanted for dinner. "Can't stay. I'll grab something on the way. Sven's losing it and needs me on the road right away." He said this while rushing through the kitchen. Linda followed him to the door, looking a bit concerned. As he picked up his suitcases and stepped outside, she leaned in for a goodbye kiss. "Sorry, I think I might be catching a cold." My throat's been sore this afternoon. Maybe it's allergies, but I don't want you to catch anything." Linda followed him to the car as he packed his things. "When will you be back?" "Probably not until Friday. We're headed to Roanoke after Paris, and then next week we'll have to go to Baltimore." Maybe he was being overly paranoid, but he thought he saw her glance away, as if calculating how his absence might provide some unexpected opportunities. He backed out of the driveway after waving goodbye, hoping she'd just assume he was stressed about work and frustrated about being called in on a Saturday. His acting skills couldn't handle more than that right now, but he had a sneaking suspicion she was already planning on having Dwayne over. Nick drove until he reached a nearby Satip Mall with a coffee shop. Like many lawyers, he found that writing things down helped him think more clearly. As he sipped his coffee, he began making a to-do list. He paused for a moment, realizing that he hadn't even considered reconciliation. That wasn't on the table. There would be consequences. His only question was how severe. The ringing of his phone interrupted him. He didn't recognize the number. "Yes?" he answered, sounding impatient. "Mr. Buford? This is Sam Granger. I don't believe we've met, but I'll get right to the point. I found your number in some old property records. I'm in the business of buying old homes and tearing them down to build McMansions. I know. Everyone hates it, but they don't mind when I hand them a check." Granger spoke so fast that Nick didn't have time to react beyond thinking that the house wasn't old, it was charming. And who was this guy talking about tearing it down? But then his rational side took over. "And? Well, I'd like to buy your house and tear it down. I could offer to build you a McMansion, but with the delays in getting county permits and all that, I can't guarantee the timing of new construction. My profit comes from flipping them quickly, but I think I can give you a great price if you and your wife are motivated to sell." Nick had a hard time suppressing a grin. Linda had chosen the house right before they got married. It was an older ranch, but it had a beautiful yard that backed up to a wooded area with a stream. It was close to the highways, but peaceful enough to feel secluded. What had truly won her over was the treehouse in the yard, visible from the master bedroom. She loved how it felt ready for children. Nick appreciated the price and the fact that it was only about a 20-minute drive from a major parking lot for the metro system. Combined with the 30-minute train ride to work, it made for a fairly good commute in the area. "Mr. Granger, I'll be in and out with work over the next few days, so I can't promise access to the property." "Call me Sam. I don't need to see the inside. Like I mentioned, it's a tear-down, and I've already checked it out from the outside." "Can you meet on Sunday morning, Sam?" "Sure. By the way, I'll likely handle the closing myself using power of attorney for my wife. She's swamped with work right now." "No worries. I'll give you the form we use." Nick took note of the address and started formulating a plan. She felt safe with her Boy Scout, didn't she? That's because Linda didn't realize that good old Lord Baden-Powell had modeled the Scouts after military scouting, skills like stealth, cunning, and self-reliance. Ambushes, in other words. She wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. But first, reconnaissance. He tossed his empty coffee cup and headed to his car for some privacy. He pulled up a number on his phone and made a call. "Frank?" he asked when the call was answered. "I need a favor, and I need it now." Frank Barry worked as a private investigator. During his 5 years as a corporate lawyer, Nick also considered his priority to participate gratuitously in helping those in need solve their legal problems. This corresponded to his ideals of public service. In addition for this work, he received a paid day from his company, and gained invaluable experience in court, which was often lacking in his regular job. A law school classmate referred Frank to him to handle a complicated divorce case involving a stepfather who mistreated his stepdaughter. Frank's findings helped secure a conviction, while the police acted slowly, which led to a quick resolution of the divorce case. When Nick shared his thoughts, Frank listened attentively. "And you believe that your wife will drag him into your bed tonight? Is she really that brave?" "Rather arrogant. She was one of the best students at the law school and thinks she can't do anything wrong." "I'll deal with it myself. I owe you one. Rivera's divorce case has attracted a lot of positive attention to me. My phone doesn't stop ringing." "I appreciate that, Frank," Nick said. "By the way, there's a treehouse in the backyard that you might find useful. It has a clear view into the master bedroom, and she tends to leave the shades open during her intimate moments. It used to bother me, but whatever gets her going, you know? You can access it by walking through the woods and jumping over the stream after dark. There are no fences or dogs around. There's a service road on the other side where you can park." "Thanks. If it's all right with you, I'd like to set up a camera outside facing the front of the house to monitor who comes and goes and when." "That's fine. And you're using Harry for the divorce, right? I'm assuming you want a divorce." "Yes and yes." "Okay, I know how he prefers the affidavit and report to be prepared. If you're correct, we'll find out soon enough." Nick then called Harry. "Is this about the law school reunion, Nick?" "I've already received 5 calls regarding contributions to their capital fund." "Nope. I want to hire you. Linda is cheating, and I want to take action against her." After Nick updated him, Harry said, "Come in tomorrow." "I realize it's Sunday, but I need to handle some paperwork at the office anyway, so I'll be there. We might as well start on this. It sounds like you've addressed the issue of not condoning the adultery. Harry is taking care of the clear and convincing evidence part. The tricky part will be negotiating the financial settlement. She's a lawyer at a large firm, so she has the resources to fight back and prolong things. Plus, she'll have colleagues offering her advice." "Leave that to me," Nick replied. "I believe we can resolve this like reasonable people." "So you're not planning to ruin her then? Fine. We'll see what you come up with." His final call was more sensitive. "Hello? Maggie, it's Nick." The silence on the other end was overwhelming. "Maggie! You bastard! Good to hear from you too, darling, after all this time. What do you want, Nick? After all this time? I need your help. I thought Linda was your partner. It's about Linda. She's cheating. What a shock. I can't help you emotionally or intimacy these days. I'm dating. And I'm sure he's a lucky guy. Look, I'm sorry. I regret that we had an affair and let it ruin our friendship. I also regret allowing Linda to push you out of my life when I thought we might have a chance to be friends again. But as a friend, I need your help now." "Jerk." Nick let her simmer for a moment. "What do you need, Nick?" he explained. There was silence on the other end before laughter erupted. "I'm in," she said, her amusement still apparent. "You always knew how to make me laugh." "Thanks, Maggie. Once things settle down, you'll have to introduce me to Mr. Lucky so I can congratulate him on his excellent taste and take you both out for dinner." "It's a date," she replied. He needed a place to lay low for a bit and make some plans, so he booked a long-term stay hotel in Fairfax, far enough from his and Linda's usual spots to avoid being seen. After settling in, he went out to grab a bite to eat. Although he wasn't particularly hungry, he realized he needed something in his stomach to soak up the alcohol he intended to consume. He chose a restaurant called El Mariachi, right across the street from the hotel. That should work, since beans and cheese would be easy to throw up later. As the hostess guided him to a booth, he noticed the bartender watching him. He looked somewhat familiar, but Nick pushed the thought aside. He had enough on his plate at the moment. Seeing pupusas on the menu indicated that the restaurant was a Central American establishment masquerading as Mexican. Most Americans were unaware of the distinction. He ordered some inexpensive tequila to go with his meal, fully aware that he would suffer a terrible hangover the next day, but he accepted the pain as part of the experience. When the waitress returned, she brought a bottle of premium top-shelf tequila and a highball glass. As Nick looked up at her, she merely gestured towards the bartender, who acknowledged him with a salute. Nick returned the salute and poured himself a generous drink while the bartender resumed serving other patrons. It took a moment for Nick to recognize him. He remembered the bartender as someone who had attended the Rivera divorce hearings and the criminal trials he had been involved in. He always sat alone in the back row with no one beside him. Once, Sonia's daughter had hugged him, but when Nick asked Sonia about it later, she had become very quiet and simply said he was a family friend. Nick ate quietly, jotting down notes on a legal pad and consuming more tequila. After the waitress cleared his empty plates, he headed to the restroom. He noticed that the ground seemed to sway beneath him, as if he were on a ship, so he leaned against the wall to steady himself. Upon returning to his booth, he carefully made his way and found the bartender sitting across from him. "Senor Nick, good to see you," he said, extending his hand for a vigorous handshake. Nick took a seat and waited. "I never got the chance to thank you for helping my cousin with that jerk she was married to." Nick attempted to argue that it was nothing, and that he was only doing what little he could, but the bartender paid him no mind. "He was badly beaten in prison." "Did you know that?" "Really badly. They don't think he'll ever walk again or eat solid food." The bartender spoke with a slight smile as he shared this with Nick. A chill ran through Nick as he gazed at the bartender. "I hadn't heard that," Nick replied. The bartender shrugged. "That's old news. What brings you to El Mariachi alone on a Saturday night? Where's your lovely wife?" Nick met the bartender's gaze directly. The bartender continued to smile, but it wasn't mocking. It was more like a smile that held a deeper understanding. Nick was puzzled as to why the bartender would ask such an odd question. How could he possibly know that Nick was married? Then it dawned on him that Linda had surprised him by attending one of the hearings and kissing him afterward. The bartender must have been present in the courtroom. "We're having some issues," Nick replied, feeling no need to lie or conceal the truth. "Like she's seeing someone else?" The bartender's knowing grin surprised Nick into silence. "I'm not a lawyer, Don Nicholas, but I can tell you that if you want to keep something a secret, you shouldn't write it down and leave it out in the open," the bartender remarked, pointing at Nick's notepad. It contained notes on adultery, doodles of Dwayne being stabbed, the name Linda encircled with a slash, and a to-do list that included "Burn the bit H." Nick shrugged his shoulders. It wasn't the best security system, but at least he didn't give away any of the client's secrets. Every person in your position should think about what they really want. What do you really want, Senor Nick? Excluding money, if you could choose a method of revenge, what would it be? Nick answered without hesitation. I wish she wasn't so beautiful anymore. I want to ruin everything in her appearance. The bartender's smile widened, and then he laughed, shaking his head. You're not thinking clearly, my friend. People who seek violent revenge like that end up in prison, and you definitely don't want to go there. Unless it's to visit clients and then leave, right? The bartender paused, giving Nick a sympathetic look. Nick nodded in agreement. However, I might be able to help you. You assisted my cousin with her situation. She could have turned to me for help, but for various reasons she didn't want to. You, on the other hand, stepped in and resolved her issue. Nick attempted to interject. Sure, he had Frank gather the evidence, but he had the police do all the actual work. It also helped that he had one of the partners at his firm, a former assistant United States attorney from the area, have a discreet conversation with the Commonwealth's attorney to ensure the criminal case was handled appropriately. Nick only showed up with his client to ensure she received the respect she deserved from the prosecutors. The divorce itself was a standard procedure after her husband was convicted in the criminal case. The bartender dismissed his protests. You must understand that aiding people who have been overlooked like my cousin is significant in itself. My family owes you a debt of gratitude. I always repay my debts. I believe you could benefit from some assistance. Nick looked at him. I'm sorry, but I don't recall your name. The bartender's smile transformed into a grin resembling that of a shark. Some refer to me as El Diablo. The devil? The bartender nodded. That's what those who dislike me call me. To my friends, I'm Jose Garcia. Now it was Nick's turn to grin. What do I need to do to earn a favor from the devil? Sell my soul. El Diablo's smile faded, and Nick's followed suit. Be serious. You're a lawyer. You don't have a soul. His smile returned, and Nick realized he was joking. Consider it professional courtesy, Senor Nick. Now, please, provide me with your address, your wife's name, and details about her daily routine. What are you planning to do? I have a few ideas, but what's that saying? Ignorance is bliss? I think it would be best if you remained blissfully ignorant. You should also keep track of your whereabouts for the next few months. Get yourself a burner phone so we can stay in contact and leave the number here at the bar. And don't return here again. It's for the best. Nick informed El Diablo about hiring a private investigator, his plans to be out of the house until Linda left for France, and her travel itinerary. El Diablo was familiar with the hotel in Paris but didn't elaborate on how he knew. Just one question, Senor Nick. Is there any possibility for reconciliation, forgiveness, mercy? I don't want to hear about any regrets later. El Diablo stared directly into his eyes. His smile vanished, replaced by a serious expression. Nick met his gaze. Taking a deep breath, Nick paused to check his emotions. The way ahead was clear. He was a straightforward person. Trust and loyalty were his core values, but they had disappeared from his marriage. Linda had flipped a switch in his mind, transforming love into hate. Eventually, with mature reflection, he knew he would feel indifferent. But that moment wasn't now. None. El Diablo relaxed. Good. Don't worry about a thing. The waitress arrived with the bill, but El Diablo waved her away, allowing Nick to tip her generously. He also permitted Nick to take the tequila bottle but cautioned him to pace himself. He needed to be sharp for the upcoming battle. Somehow, Nick woke up on Sunday morning at a reasonable hour with only a slight hangover. He arrived at Harry's law office by 10 a.m., finding Frank already there. I'm sorry, Nick, Frank said. She's definitely sleeping with this guy, in your bed. He arrived just 2 hours after you called me, and he was still there when I left this morning. We shot a very clear video. I've made a copy for you, but you might want to think twice before watching this. Harry intervened. You better not see this. I don't want you to do something reckless and end up being arrested. Don't worry, Nick replied, taking the DVD from Frank. Just tell me the details. I climbed into that treehouse, as you asked, and they were with each other. I took some very clear pictures of their faces. They were definitely engaged in intimacy. To be honest, I think it's just physical intimacy. They didn't talk much. I don't know if this will change your plans. No, it doesn't. What happened? Cowgirl. They both had a lot of endurance. Thanks. That just makes me feel worse. Sorry about that. Anyway, I know Linda from that party you hosted last year, so I can recognize her. We checked the guy's license plates. Dwayne Martin. We know he works with her. We're not sure how long it's been going on, but to me it looks like clear and convincing evidence. Oh, and we have a camera at the front of the house that monitors the driveway and garage, so we can track when they come and go. I'll send you the link to the live stream on our secure server. I spoke with Harry, and I'm going to draft a report and a supporting affidavit for him to file. Sorry again, man. Frank shook hands with both Harry and Nick before leaving the office. So, what are you planning to do? Harry inquired. I'm going to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, but don't serve her yet. Harry glanced at Nick, his expression neutral. Trust me on this, Harry. Whenever I hear those words, I start feeling uneasy. I don't want you to do anything reckless. I believe everything will go more smoothly than you expect. Harry grimaced. Listen, Harry, just submit it on Monday afternoon just before the clerk's office closes. Give me the docket number and I'll handle the rest. Just remember, Nick, I don't practice criminal law. Not very well, at least. If you find yourself in a tough situation, I won't be much help. You'll be pleasantly surprised, Nick replied as he exited. Nick's next appointment was with Sam Granger. The meeting was very productive, and Nick discovered they could sell the house for over $100,000 more than the mortgage without paying any real estate agent commissions. Linda would be ecstatic if she knew. Nick promised to return with the necessary paperwork to finalize the deal as soon as possible. As he left Sam's office, Nick checked his phone. There were no messages or calls. She must still be with Dwayne. Taking advantage of the moment, Nick called his boss, Sven, to request 2 weeks off immediately, or he would resign. Sven panicked, knowing Nick was the only one fully aware of the case's details, and agreed. Luckily, they were experiencing a slow period in Sven's work, so he could accommodate Nick's request. With everything in place, Nick headed back to his hotel to focus on his real work. By Monday evening, he felt prepared. Linda had left him voicemails on Sunday and Monday nights, which he hadn't returned. He was conserving his energy for Tuesday morning. Thanks to Frank's camera positioned outside the house, Nick was aware that Dwayne had spent Monday night there. Considering Dwayne's timeline from Sunday night to Monday morning, Nick figured he would likely leave for work around 8 a.m. Linda would follow shortly after, around 8:30 a.m. So, at 7 a.m., Nick entered through the front door, calling, "Honey, I'm home." He heard hurried footsteps upstairs, and then Linda appeared at the top of the stairs in her robe, looking disheveled and taken aback. "What a surprise, honey," she exclaimed, attempting to sound cheerful but barely managing to hide her panic. "I thought you wouldn't be back until Friday. You didn't return my calls." "Sorry about that," Nick replied with a smile. "You know how travel can be." He feigned ignorance about the wine glasses in the living room and made his way to the dining room. Linda lingered in the doorway, trying to gauge her next move and prevent him from going upstairs where Dwayne was evidently hiding. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled her. "Could you get that, honey?" Nick asked. In the meantime, he began placing papers on the dining room table, feigning ignorance as Linda squared her shoulders and approached the door, possibly anticipating a process server with divorce documents. Instead, it was Maggie, who walked in just as Linda opened the door, simply saying, "Hello." Curiously, Linda followed Maggie as she took a seat at the dining room table and opened a briefcase. "Sorry, hun," Nick said. "I don't know when I'll have time to breathe again, and I can't bear the thought of you going on an overseas trip without updating the powers of attorney. Just in case something goes wrong, and we need to handle any financial or medical emergencies. Oh, and I found some time over the weekend to look into refinancing the mortgage at an excellent rate. Since we're both traveling, I thought this might be the only opportunity we have to get this sorted. Sorry for the short notice." He tried to appear remorseful. "Who's this?" Linda asked, pointing at Maggie, her temple no longer throbbing as much. "I'm Maggie," she replied. "Maggie is a notary," Nick clarified. Linda visibly relaxed. Although she still had a lover hidden upstairs, things weren't completely spiraling out of control just yet. "That's my Boy Scout, always ready," she said with a smile as she sat down, her eyes still alert. "That's just who I am, hun." He handed Linda a pen and began sliding papers in front of her. "The arrow flags indicate where to sign. Take your time to read through them if you'd like." "I trust you," Linda said with a big smile, quickly signing all the documents in front of her. He hoped to God she meant it, because otherwise he was in trouble. But as the saying goes, fortune favors the bold. As Linda signed each document, Nick organized them and handed them to Maggie, who arranged them neatly and notarized them. "Mrs. Buford, do you have a form of photo ID?" Maggie inquired. Linda stood up from the table to retrieve her purse. Maggie and Nick exchanged a knowing glance but quickly looked down at the table to stifle their laughter. Linda returned with her driver's license. Maggie snapped a photo of it with her phone and recorded the details in her notarial log. Linda offered them coffee, but both Nick and Maggie politely declined as Maggie finished documenting the notarized documents while Nick sorted everything into different folders. Linda kept glancing upstairs, anticipating Nick's next move, plotting her strategy. After putting away her supplies, Maggie smiled at Nick when Linda wasn't looking. Nick then provided Linda with a breather by saying he needed to attend a teleconference and would head to his basement office. Linda's shoulders relaxed, relieved to have some time to usher Dwayne out and tidy up the traces of his presence before Nick returned from his man cave. Nick went downstairs, giving her the false impression that she was still deceiving him. He pretended not to hear the heavy footsteps on the stairs as Dwayne made his escape or the garage door opening for Dwayne's car. However, when he heard the shower running in the master bath, Nick gathered his things, walked out the cellar door, and left in his car without a word to his wife. 2 hours later, after enjoying a hearty diner breakfast, Nick found himself in Harry's office. Harry appeared stunned. "So, you're saying you convinced your wife to sign a CC 1406 form to accept service of the divorce complaint and waive all future process service and notifications for any upcoming proceedings?" "Yes. The properly notarized form is right here," Nick replied, pointing to it. "You're also saying that you managed to have your wife, a skilled litigator, sign a property settlement agreement that grants you all the proceeds from the sale of your house and its contents, the cars, and any jewelry she owns? It also gives you complete authority to decide the fate of her personal belongings and allows both of you to retain your respective retirement accounts. And there are no alimony payments from you to her? She earns more than I do anyway." Based on these documents, she indicated that she was ready to end the marriage, having about $125,000 in retirement savings, in addition to almost $200,000 in student loans during her undergraduate and law school studies. Is that right? She was always very generous. Harry squinted at Nick before returning to the papers on his desk. And you also forced her to sign an affidavit in which she admits the fact of infidelity, and even admits that her lover was in the marital bedroom when she signed the affidavit and spent the night there after intimacy with her the night before. Are you seriously saying that her written testimony supports this email exchange in which she discusses staying with her lover because she likes him? Is that what you're saying? Lawyer, Nick replied, trying to keep his face as expressionless as possible. There's nothing wrong with the documents. Henry looked at the documents, at Natick, started to smile, but restrained himself and turned in his chair. Forget it, I'll handle this. You're a well-respected member of the bar and a friend from law school. How was I supposed to know you fabricated all of this? It seemed legitimate to me, Your Honor. I feel truly embarrassed. I was completely misled by my client's betrayal of my trust. If anyone deserves disbarment, it's Nicholas A. Buford, J.D. Esquire, Your Honor. Do you understand where I'm headed with this, Nick? Yep. If needed, this notary can confirm that Linda signed all these documents. Yes, she can. Will she assert that Linda carefully reviewed the documents? I wouldn't want to predict or influence anyone's testimony, but as you mentioned, Linda is a seasoned lawyer specializing in litigation, so I'm confident she gave the documents the attention she deemed appropriate. I'm sure the notary will testify that she saw Linda Buford examining the documents and signing each one. I cannot provide an opinion regarding her understanding of the contents of each document otherwise. All right then, Harry said. I'll get all this paperwork filed today, along with Frank's affidavit and report, which includes photos and the DVD. I'll try to keep it off the electronic docket for a while. We don't want this in the news just yet, do we? No, Nick replied. Linda's leaving for Paris in a little over 2 weeks. The longer we can keep this under wraps, the better. Do you know anyone at the circuit court? Remember Seth? Harry asked. He was a day student a year after us. He had trouble landing a job at a law firm. So now he's clerking at the circuit court to boost his resume. He might be able to help speed things up, but if a judge demands live testimony, everything could fall apart. Linda will have to decide not to contest it for some reason related to fraud on the court once she realizes what's happening. If things go south, then I'll likely have to withdraw as your attorney. That's fair. Someday you can share the whole story with me, but I'm not ready to hear it now. For the next 2 weeks, Nick kept a distance from Linda. He sent her texts at strange hours, explaining how busy he was, but he didn't answer her calls. As the days went by, she called him less often. You really frightened her, Frank told him at the end of the week. According to our video feed, Dwayne hasn't visited the house at all since you surprised them on Tuesday morning. I can't tell if they're meeting at his place during the week or having an affair in the office, but they're definitely not doing anything at the house. I'll keep you posted if anything changes. The only significant change was that Nick had quietly returned to the house after confirming Linda was gone and retrieved some financial documents he thought he might need. He had also signed a contract to sell the house to Sam Granger, with the sale set to finalize during the first week of Linda's trip to France. Aside from that, Nick went to the gym, indulged in some light reading, and reflected on how he had reached his 30th birthday with such a chaotic life. He had informed Sven that he needed several more weeks off, a request Sven had reluctantly approved. She's back with him in the house again, Frank mentioned on Saturday, a week before Linda was scheduled to leave for Paris. Thanks for the update, Nick replied. He didn't care much but was determined to burn the sheets instead of selling them when he moved out. By now, Nick had viewed the video Frank had given him earlier. He understood the appeal. Dwayne was a few years younger, and according to Frank's investigation, was a gym enthusiast who frequently posed in front of the mirror after his workouts. Aside from that, he was quite ordinary. In contrast, Nick was in decent shape but didn't have a chiseled abdomen. It seemed Linda was after superficial qualities like eye candy, which Nick found unnecessary. Before he realized it, Linda had set off on her eagerly awaited trip to Paris. One of Frank's associates followed her to the airport and waited until her flight took off for Europe. Once he received the confirmation, Nick headed to the house, gathered all of Linda's clothes into a pile in the living room, and packed his belongings. The next day, the movers arrived, packed Linda's clothes, and sent them to a storage facility. They also packed up Nick's items and moved them to an apartment he had secured. Thanks to Sam Granger, the skilled house flipper, Nick managed to sell the furniture easily. When the house was finally empty, Nick took a final stroll through it before completing his last task. He had meticulously arranged the wedding photos and album, along with Linda's bridal gown. He carried them to the fire pit on the patio beneath the treehouse, placed the photos and album on top of the charcoal, added the gown and some lighter fluid, and struck a match. After everything burned, Nick felt satisfied to see that the video captured a lot of detail, even showing the individual photos as they were added to the pit. The day after, Nick finalized the sale of his marital home, utilizing a power of attorney from his wife to sign on her behalf. She really should have been more careful about reading what she signed. Thanks to the financial power of attorney, Nick was able to deposit the proceeds from the home's sale into his personal account after endorsing the check as her attorney in fact, and he also closed their joint accounts. Just 3 days later, still during the first week of Linda's trip to La Belle France, the construction crew demolished the house and cleared away the debris within a few days. Site preparation work commenced after that. Unfortunately, the beloved tree with the treehouse, perfect for children, had to be removed to make way for a new gazebo. At that point, with the area that once held Nick and Linda's happy home now reduced to a large patch of dirt, construction came to a halt. It appeared that something had gone awry with the permitting process. Both Nick and his law school friend, who worked in the county permitting office, believed the issue would sort itself out a couple of days after Linda returned from France, once the necessary forms were submitted and approved. During this time, Nick avoided all communication with Linda. He stopped answering her calls, ceased sending text messages, and ignored her emails and voicemails. Although some of her friends and family reached out, Nick responded with brief messages saying he was busy traveling, mainly to deter them from visiting the house. El Diablo called him on the burner phone, mentioning that Linda and Dwayne appeared stressed and weren't looking well. She might have suspected something was amiss. When Nick asked how El Diablo knew this, he simply replied that he had connections everywhere, even in Europe. He asked Nick if he was interested in retrieving Linda's engagement and wedding rings. When Nick declined, El Diablo inquired if he would mind if someone else took possession of them. Absolutely not. Great. I might have someone in mind who would want them. On a Wednesday, 2 days before Linda was scheduled to return from Paris, Nick found himself in Harry's office. I have no idea how this happened, but here's the divorce decree. It's unusually quick for a case like this, and Seth didn't share any details with me. I'm not interested in knowing, and I'm not going to ask. Consider yourself lucky, and congratulations on being single again. Here's a copy I'll be sending to your ex-wife. I'm sure she'll be delighted. As Nick reached his car outside Harry's office, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but when he answered, he immediately recognized El Diablo's voice. Nick, you should take a vacation. Right now. Go to a place bustling with people. People who know you and can vouch for your presence." El Diablo hung up. Nick realized it had been a while since he last saw some college friends in New York City. Luckily, their schedules were free over the next few days, so he took the Amtrak that same day, attended some shows and museums, and enjoyed lunches, coffees, and dinners with various friends, mostly paying with his credit card. He also tipped generously at his hotel, ensuring all the staff knew who he was. While there, he express-mailed a DVD of himself burning her wedding dress and wedding album to Linda's parents' house. On Sunday afternoon, while savoring a coffee and cake in Little Italy, Manhattan, Nick's phone rang. It was his father-in-law. "Nick, where are you? Linda's really upset. She's in the hospital." "Really? What happened to her?" This was starting to get intriguing. She returned from her trip on Friday, but she and a colleague were reportedly abducted at the airport. They were both under the influence of illegal substances, and they only managed to escape this morning. The colleague was brutally beaten, and Linda, here her father's voice faltered. There was a time when Nick would have felt some sympathy for her. What happened to Linda? She woke up and found herself covered in tattoos. Tattoos that had terrible things written on them, for example, that she was a girl of easy virtue. As soon as she saw it, some guy in a mask came in and hurt her. Impressive, Nick thought. Indeed, it was the icing on the cake. He would have been pleased if Linda had realized that he had betrayed her in court, just as she had betrayed him in their marriage. But it was an explosion of rosy delight. It would be worth an immortal soul if he had an extra one. "I'm sorry to hear that. I'm currently out of town. What do you need me to do?" Nick could sense the shock on the other end of the call. "You're her husband. She's your wife." "Actually, no. We divorced last week. The papers were finalized. She's been unfaithful with the man she's traveling with." "What?" What part of that was unclear? Nick recognized he was being unnecessarily harsh but felt indifferent. "I have a video. I can send you a copy if you're interested." There was a pause on the line. Nick wondered if his father-in-law was having a heart attack. "We're finished, so you'll have to bring her home. She's no longer my responsibility." "You did this!" his father-in-law shouted. "Me? I've been in New York since Wednesday, celebrating my divorce." "I understand you're upset, and I genuinely hope Linda recovers soon, but I don't believe we have anything else to discuss." He ended the call. At that moment, Nick realized that the pressures of city life had become overwhelming lately. He sent an email to Sven, letting him know that, in the end, he and the firm could go screw themselves, politely, of course. A quick online search revealed an REI store in Soho, so Nick equipped himself with brand new hiking and camping gear. Linda had never enjoyed camping, so this was an opportunity for him to reconnect with his scouting roots. The hotel kindly agreed to store his luggage for a small fee, and before long he was headed to the Adirondack Mountains to immerse himself in nature until things settled down. Luckily, he had his passport in case he found time for a trip to Canada, and it turned out he did. For most of the next 8 weeks, he kept his phone off. Initially, it seemed that some deranged woman had taken his ex-wife's phone, as he received dozens, if not hundreds, he lost count, of messages filled with frantic screaming and crying. He only listened to a couple before deleting the rest. There were also numerous bizarre emails. Her account must have been compromised. When would he find time to read all of that? He hoped that whatever was going on with the crazy woman, she would get the help she needed. 8 weeks later, Nick met Frank for a drink, and Harry was there as well. "Just to clarify," Harry said as they settled in, I ended our attorney-client relationship right after I handed you the divorce decree. I sent you a notification via certified mail. You probably haven't checked your mail yet." "Not yet," Nick confessed. "You're in for a serious storm, my friend," Harry warned. "What do you think, Frank?" "More like a shit typhoon." "I like that. There's a mess everywhere anyway. A lot of destruction." Harry quickly finished his bourbon and immediately ordered another. "Go ahead, Frank." On Monday morning, the former Mrs. Buford went to the old manor with her parents. We haven't taken off the outdoor camera yet. When she saw the wasteland completely destroyed, she fell to her knees and sobbed. In the late afternoon, she curled up in a ball and then began kicking and screaming like a little child. Then a team of workers arrived with their equipment, and she lost her temper again. For the third time, the builders saw her face covered with tattoos and started laughing. I must say the quality of the work done is impressive. All the words are very clearly visible on camera. And her appearance completely confirmed it all. Harry continued the story. That afternoon, she and a couple of high-powered lawyers from a big firm arrived at my modest office, coming in with a strong attitude. They didn't have an appointment, so I made them wait for 15 minutes. I ensured my Glock was loaded and easily accessible in my desk. Thankfully, we're in Virginia, right? After 15 minutes, they were all shouting at me, demanding to discuss emergency motions, bar complaints, and contempt proceedings. I have to admit, it was hard not to notice the ink smeared all over their faces. It was clearly done in red and blue ink, making it visible from afar. Once I managed to refocus, I asked what the exact problem was. What statement in any of the pleadings was untrue? They all paused and exchanged glances. So I inquired whether there was any dispute about the fact that your ex had committed adultery. They all agreed. I then turned on the video that I had prepared while they waited, showing old Linda clearly engaging in an intimacy act with someone who wasn't her husband in their marital bed. It seemed they hadn't gone through the entire case file yet. Everyone appeared embarrassed at that point. Then Linda started yelling that I hadn't given her a chance to explain. I told her that it didn't matter what her reasons were. The fact remained that she did it. She quickly recovered and began complaining about how she never agreed to let you sell the house and questioned what happened with you burning her wedding gown, photos, and album. I presented her with copies of the powers of attorney, one of which was specifically for selling the house. I also showed her the property settlement agreement, which granted you the right, at your sole discretion, to manage her personal belongings, telling her she was fortunate to have her clothes. I asked her if she was denying that it was her signature on the documents. She said no, but claimed she never agreed to any of what they said. I then asked if her entire defense rested on the fact that she had never read the document she signed. I asked her to picture how cross-examination would go if she contested anything in court. That made her stop talking. I also pointed out the affidavit she signed, where she admitted that her lover was upstairs at that very moment, and asked if that wasn't true. That's when she fainted. Her attorneys attempted to revive her, but I called 911 instead. She refused to go to the hospital with them. Then she started screaming about the tattoos and her boyfriend getting beaten up, and I told her that had nothing to do with you as far as I knew. You were out of town anyway, and maybe Dwayne had angered some other wife's husband by fooling around with her, or perhaps another woman thought Linda was taking Dwayne away from her. I told them they knew where the Fairfax Police Department was if they wanted to discuss any criminal case. Sorry, I missed all of that. It gets more interesting, Harry said. So they kept going on about filing a motion for reconsideration and all that. That's when I told them that earlier that day I'd received an anonymous email with links to several videos of Linda and Dwayne in your bed. The message said the videos would be sent to everyone Linda knew unless she let things go. It also said, Nick, that you were unaware of this and wouldn't be able to stop it. The email claimed they were people you had once helped and that they'd protect you, but they'd hit send that very day if she didn't back off. You know anything about that? I've been out of town, Harry. They left after that. Haven't heard from them since. And nothing has happened at the courthouse. Now it was Frank's turn. They must have gone to the cops because a couple of detectives showed up. They asked for copies of the videos and the report, but then they lost interest. Neither Linda nor Dwayne could explain what happened. They just said they got into a taxi at the airport, and the next thing they knew, Dwayne was in the hospital. As for Linda, she woke up in a cheap hotel, got punched in the face, and ended up in the hospital too. The room was charged to her credit card, along with room service and the minibar. Nick then mentioned that the hotel manager had told him New York cops had checked his stay and contacted his friends in the city, all of whom confirmed his busy schedule there. Rumor has it, Harry said, your ex is hiding in her parents' basement while getting laser tattoo removal. Problem is, they charge by the square inch, and she's covered head to toe. That's got to cost tens of thousands. That's unfortunate, Nick replied. Harry glared at Nick while Frank struggled to keep from laughing. And what happened to the meathead? From what I heard, he's in pretty bad shape, Harry replied. He's got a long road of physical therapy ahead. His head's messed up, several concussions. He's probably going to struggle finding another paralegal job. Their firm let both of them go too. It sounds like their relationship fell apart on the trip and it ended up affecting the entire arbitration. Things were missed, exhibits weren't prepared, and the witness summaries had issues. They lost on the key points. The client wasn't happy, so the firm had to make sacrifices to keep them for future work. One day, Nick, you'll have to explain how you pulled this off, Frank said. Pulled off what? I'm just a Boy Scout. Maggie was waiting in the car when he came out. I'm a little jealous. No one even asked if I actually notarized the documents or if she read them before signing. I was all set to say I saw her review each one, but I couldn't estimate how much time she spent. We should talk about this over dinner. I owe you and the boyfriend a meal to thank you for helping me get my freedom. Maggie turned toward him, peeking over her sunglasses as Nick pulled the car out of the lot. There's no boyfriend, you idiot. Nick slammed on the brakes and stared at her. Seriously? Now shut up and drive me home so you can start the long and painful process of apologizing to me. All right, Nick grinned, but I need to stop at the post office first. Why? I'm sending a postcard to a friend, Nick said, pulling one out of the glove compartment. It had the Boy Scout logo on the front. I'm asking her if she feels safe now.